Welcome back to Cheap Pop, everybody. This is your host, Matthew Carlin, and I'm here with Derek Kirby. How's it going, Derek?
Good. Ready to talk some Ava here. We got some interesting stuff. It's starting to get real deep.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be maybe a slow episode where I got to just kind of relax and I wasn't taking notes all the time. Oh, how wrong I was. I've got 2 pages of notes now. It's more than I've ever had.
Yeah, my hand was cramping just taking notes on episode 13 alone. Just because so much is coming at you that I had to keep pausing the episode. Wait, damn it. I got to get this down. I got to make sure I'm getting this clarification or this little detail because just so much is coming at you, which makes sense, right? That episode, we're dealing with supercomputers and stuff on both sides. And it's just good God, man, chaos. But it was good.
Yeah. So overall, I think we both like this episode. Mm-hmm. A lot to take in, definitely. So we start off and they're doing a diagnostics on the Magi, or Magi, however you want to pronounce it. And the first thing we hear from Rasuko is, I wrote this down, no abnormalities as they're doing this diagnostics. And they say, my mother's doing fine and I'm growing older, but with each passing day. So immediately you're trying to figure out okay, is your mom the Magi? Are you losing your mind and you're thinking that this computer is your mother at this point just because you've been working this job so long?
Right.
So I guess what were your initial thoughts on that when you watched it?
My very first thoughts watching this episode, and obviously it explains it in a few moments, but when I very first was watching this scene, I just kind of assumed it was okay, well, the computer, the Magi system was her mother's life work. That is almost her legacy, if you will, as it relates to the inner workings of Nerv. And so it kind of makes sense that she would almost append that to it. Her mother wasn't necessarily there. Again, this was my impression. Her mother wasn't necessarily there for her as much because she was so dedicated to her work, which is kind of a recurring theme in the series. And so I just kind of thought okay, she's appending that to now, I have to continue my mother's work, managing the system she built. So it's almost like she views that system like it's her mother. I thought about it more of a metaphor.
Which we figure out it's a little bit less than that, and it's
a little more literal.
More of a literal sense, definitely.
Yeah.
So after we get into this, before we really get into the mother portion and how that actually plays into the Magi, we're doing this harmonics testing without the plug suits. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're trying to get some naked children again, just because that's what the show loves to do. We got to pull some sexuality into it.
They are unapologetic in their fan service. Half the time when you get the end of episode preview, it tones it down a little bit, but literally the end of episode previews for the upcoming episode early on would be don't worry, there's a lot more fan service next time. And you're but why? I get that you're feeding into this whole thing that people obsess over, but you're good enough. You don't have to do that. You don't need a cheap gimmick to get over. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's the early episodes of an HBO or a Showtime series. It's hey, there's some sexy stuff going on here. Not just the fact that we've got a great show.
Yeah.
So, which, builds some funny tension, just like always. Asuka's obviously the one that's most upset by it because she doesn't want anybody to see her naked and talking about how embarrassing it is, which is the constant reoccurring thing from Asuka. It's It's always about embarrassment, and it's always something regarding don't look at me in a way that I don't want you to look at me. So we move past that and we go into that they're doing this testing with the integration of the Magi, which I am a little confused upon. Were the Magi integrated previously, and what are these things that they're in?
So these kind of tubes that they're in, it's kind of I think of it like an updated version of the entry plugs that they ride in essentially as they're put into the Avas. And I think this whole thing is just kind of them continuously having to update their system and improve the quality of it. So here's how I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't know if this is what they're going for, but I love the implication of it that I was like, I'm going to mention that on the podcast. The idea being that they're continuously having to upgrade and improve the synchronization rate, because I think if they didn't, the rate of connection would deteriorate with like over time. I don't think it's something that you could just say like, okay, I've done all this stuff, I don't have to make any other advancements or adjustments. This is just what it's going to be. I think if you were to drag that out over like, okay, over the course of a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever, without continuously improving, I think that synchronization rate would be dropping, kind of because as we've toyed with this idea that the Avas are artificial humans, as we've toyed with the idea that like there's some degree of self-agency in them, right? The whole idea of them going berserk. I wonder how much of that is like them not liking being controlled, almost, if you will. And so it's almost like the Ava rejecting the pilot unless you can stay ahead of the curve. Think about like the body and like white blood cells, like how they would attack the invading presence, essentially the germ or virus or whatever. I was
we definitely get more of a sense of in the next episode,
right? And I was thinking down that kind of line of thinking, like, what if all the advancements, they're positioned as if like, well, hey, this is something we just have to do to try and push everything forward and be at our best against the Angels. That could be true, but also what if it was because you're having to adjust to the Ava itself, which might not comply otherwise? Like, what if you're almost like, for lack of a better term, enslaving that, essentially using it like a puppet to do this whole thing, and kind of the ethical things of that. Like, I don't know, it was an interesting kind of rabbit hole my mind started to go down, and I was like, I kind of like that, because you're trying to stay ahead of the Ava itself almost in terms of rejecting the pilot. And I think that adds to that thing that we see with previous tests that go wrong. The Ava freaks out, rejects them. The pilot's always in some kind of grave danger. And I'm just like, what if that was testing that and it didn't, something with how they set up whatever with the harmonics or whatever, didn't stay far enough ahead of it, and the Ava actually was able to resist. It would do that every time, presumably, if they weren't staying ahead of the Ava as well as trying to stay ahead of the Angels.
So the harmonics, in a sense, is helping them with that synchronization. Like, it's furthering that process. Because I was trying to figure out, like, what exactly is it doing that's kind of creating this, this bond, let's say. Yeah. But so when I'm looking at what they're in, so they're doing harmonics testing, but they're not in Avas. They're in... Right.
They call them weird imitation bodies, is what they
imitation bodies. Yes, that's correct. And they don't look like they have heads. They look like it's mostly body and then some like tubing coming out of the neck.
I think it's just kind of like almost like the core of the Ava would be like essentially where the entry plugs are injected into the Avas, like the torso essentially, but not with the full capability of that. It's almost like, hey, on the chance this doesn't work, if it was in an Ava, the Ava would rampage. But if we do it like this, then it can't do anything. It doesn't have limbs. It's just like, oh, okay, well, this didn't work. It's just, I think it's them finding perhaps safer ways to test that, because they've now had multiple failed tests with this where somebody has rampaged or gone nuts. And so they're trying to figure out, how do we do this in a safer way where even if we're wrong, it doesn't result in risk to someone's life or countless, however many dollars in danger of damage,
Yeah. Massive amounts, of course, because that's the way they roll. So we get a little further into the episode. We get to the core theory and the mainframes were built by Rasuko's mother. Yeah. And then we start getting into the protein wall 87. And they say that there's a stain or a corrosion that's possibly rushed by the rush construction, because they were like 6 months ahead of time, something like that. Yeah. Which makes you think that this is something they've run into before. Which I also am curious, because we do find out that this is an angel that's causing this.
A very unique angel.
A very unique.
Completely unlike anything else we've seen.
Yeah, we're in a totally different ballpark here. And not until the end of that episode, I was wondering, since there were so many like I mean, what we assume are past instances of this, water leak, corrosion, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
How did this angel get that information in the first place? Because my assumption is it was trying to hide itself in an existing flaw. So it somehow knew that this is a problem that has occurred before and then took the shape of that issue so it wouldn't be detected until it was ready to strike, which I feel like it was building to, which is why when we actually figure out it is an angel, it's so quickly replicating because it's almost like prepared for this attack and has been hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, I think about it as because of how much damage, especially in the span now of this series, how much damage has occurred at Nerv HQ. Like, we've had the geofront breached at this point. So the angels, they know exactly where it is. They're able to see that, okay, repairs are being done there, because we don't know where the angels are coming from. We don't know, like, are they observing Nerv? Like, we just see when they show up. We've only once engaged an angel ourselves, and that was the one in the volcano. It's always the angels make the first move, and then they're responding and reacting to it. And so I would assume there's some degree of surveillance, or even just deductive reasoning, where they see, like, okay, well, we know where it is. We know, hey, between this and this, all of this got fixed. So that those parts had to come from somewhere. And so maybe because this particular angel is one that is basically a collection of these almost like nanobots or, super little nano supercomputer things that can self-replicate and does at a rapid rate later on when it's basically in full attack mode. Maybe all it was like almost laying a trap of like, okay, well, it needs this type of material. So we'll leave almost like a microscopic basically version of that initial angel there. It'll get installed, be able to kind of continue observing almost in that silence. And then when it's ready, it'll replicate and it'll attack, attack because at this point it's been able to learn a lot just by seeing how it like, think about like a couple episodes ago, the power being shut down at Nerv, and they're talking about like, oh, someone would learn a lot just seeing how we go about our boot up. Presumably to me, the angel is already there when that's happening. Yeah. And so that's a really interesting thing. Like, as we talk about like its rate of spread, how it navigates their systems, how it's a step ahead of them constantly. I'm just like, that would make total sense, because while I don't think the angels are who caused that blackout, I do think that that's a perfect opportunity for this thing to be all the more dangerous, and maybe what even sped up its particular rate of attack.
Yeah, I can understand that. That makes sense.
Yep. So yeah, it's a really interesting one because when they become aware of it, they think, like you said, it's like a corrosion, a stain or whatever from water damage. And yes, Risuko does make a comment of like, what, again? Like, it almost seems to me like the effects of the angel, it's progressed enough now that it's almost like the places it's been are starting to leave almost like a mark of some kind for them. And so they haven't put together what's happening yet, but it's almost like the angel's like, oh shit, all right, well, I'm going to have to do something now because they're getting wise to me, basically. And so, that's kind of what sets off this just crazy hack spree, basically.
Yeah, so we go crazy. We get these abnormalities. We say that there's a degradation and emitting heat. And then everything starts lighting up. We've got abnormalities in tube 6, which I believe is Ray's tube, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So we get a little bit further into there. They talk about preparing the polyzone lasers at max strength to fire on intrusion, which felt to me in that instance like this is something they'd run into before,
or at least had planned for. Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out at that time, do they know what's happening or do they think this is something else? Like, because they seem prepared for that instance, but then once they figure out it's an Ava or an angel, they're taken back, which I was like, what were they expecting initially? Because it didn't feel like they were expecting an angel, but they were expecting some sort of presence or force. Do you have thoughts on that? And maybe that's expressed later in the series, but
I do. I get what you're saying. I am curious because when they're initially engaging it, they don't realize it's an angel. It's not until the AT field presents when they try to shoot the lasers at it that they realize like, wait a minute. And then their system identifies like it's a pattern blue, which is their thing for identifying an angel.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they thought it was or why they had contingencies in place to try and deal with what they thought that type of threat was. But it's very clear that like they're taking it seriously even before it's an angel. That's just what suddenly kicks it into a whole new gear of like, what the like, how is this happening? How did this happen? Like, but even before that, they're like, okay, yes, do this. Like, we got to do this right now. We have to adjust for this. Like, they are on top of it. And then only once the pattern reveals itself do they realize like, oh, this is even worse than we thought.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
Rey's body, her imitation body, starts moving and acting on its own, which I guess at this point we're not expecting.
Imagine if they were in the Avas when that happened. They would have been hacking the Avas on the spot. So that's, I think, a very fortunate break for Nerv.
Yeah. Now, is that your thought of why we're in these other suits doing these harmonics testing, because it's a safe place from the Ava?
Maybe. Again, that could be part of their continued development, trying to find a way to make it safer, because when all this is happening, they jettison the Avas to the surface without the pilots. They're just empty suits, whatever, sitting up on the surface because they're like, they cannot be in here plugged into stuff because this thing is hacking everything. So it's very much it could be something like that. Like, again, there's times where you don't really know how much Nerv does know, because there are certain people in Nerv who seem to know a hell of a lot more than the majority of people, including Misato and sometimes even Risuko, know.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible they realized it could happen, and maybe that's why they had contingencies in place. But I don't think they anticipated an angel. And I think that's why, like, the alarm is blaring as soon as this is happening with Rey's imitation body and everything. And Gendo literally tells them, shut off the alarm, and we're going to claim it was a false alarm. We're not going to let anybody know that there is an angel this close, like inside Nerv HQ, this close. And what they're talking about with him and Futsuki is this close to Adam. Like, they're not going to let anybody know that this is happening, and that comes back into play later. But it just shows, like, again, kind of playing into the politics of it. Like, yes, we have a catastrophe, but we can't rely on anybody else outside of this. We have to figure out how to deal with this ourselves internally, and we're going to have to lie our asses off about what actually happened, even if we do get out of this.
Yeah, the constant fear from Gendo of what if I lose control? Because there is so much government oversight, and I'm sure that all of his funding is in jeopardy anytime something like this happens. I mean, you have to explain this to the council, you have to explain this to the government. Anything he's doing can easily be stripped away, and we already know he has other intentions, which we still don't know what's going on with Adam. But with these new,
there's a cool point on there too. Not a cool point, but I think a noteworthy point too. In that same thing where he's telling them to raise the Avas to the surface and that they're going to lie basically about what's actually happening. He tells them, make Unit 1 a priority. If it comes to it, the other two can be sacrificed if need be. So he's placing extra emphasis on Unit 1 above anything else, which is saying something, because we were most recently told that Unit 2 is the one true Ava or whatever. Granted, that was Asuka saying it, but it's the newest developed one, the one that's considered most combat ready. And yet Unit 1 is the one, not because Shinji's involved, even if he was, again, Gendo doesn't care about that, but whether or not Shinji was even in this, the Ava to be in danger himself, doesn't matter. He's just like, no, all cost, protect Unit 1.
Yeah, which is interesting. I was curious where that's going, which I don't think we've learned at this point or in the next couple of episodes. So
sorry,
another thing no, not at all. And something else I was thinking with these imitation bodies is this is another Gendo future plan. So we get into so much of the religious background within these next couple of episodes that I'm thinking, okay, maybe these imitation bodies are Gendo's trials for, hey, how am I going to live in this new world that I'm planning on building, which is my expectation of what this whole thing is, with the introduction of Adam and the Magi and some other things we learn in the next couple of episodes. But my thought is this is going to be the way that since we've already realized that the angels are so different than our expectations of an angel, that I would assume these bodies are closer to what the original Adam and Eve would have been like. So maybe a way for him to live in this world that he's planning on building. But again, speculation at this point, because I really don't know. This is just me taking a guess.
Yeah, conjecture. Yeah, but it's interesting. I see what you're getting at.
So we get a little bit further along. They send the Avis to the surface. We get another shot of Kaji, who obviously is always up to no good. He's doing something he's not supposed to be. We're not quite sure what it is. We just know that it gets thrown off by the angel. He kind of ducks out, and we don't really know what he was doing. So they come up with a plan to kill the angel, which at first is, let's introduce oxygen, because that seems to be what is going to kill it. Yeah. And then immediately the angel starts to adapt, starts to evolve. Oxygen no longer is...
It's almost like it baited them into it.
That's what I was wondering at first, is I was like, did it like that? And it was planning. It's kind of like, reading the FBI handbook when you're in a hostage situation. Yeah. It's like, the next play. So if I need oxygen, maybe I play like that's not what I need. And then you give it to me trying to do something. So
because its rate of spread, like, exponentially increases the second they pump oxygen into that environment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's like, not only is its rate of spread going crazy, but the subcomputer at Nerv is being hacked, the firewall is breached, decoy interfaces are dispatched. Like, it's just total chaos, as it's almost like you see like an entire team of people in the command center just like furiously typing, trying to like out hack this thing, which is just flying through their defenses, running 12 to 16 digit passcodes to breach all of these firewalls and everything. And it's rapidly making its way towards the Magi, which they're like, yeah, if it gets there, we're totally fucked.
Yes, so we get into the Magi, and we finally, I don't know if we've gotten the names of the Magi before, but this is the first time.
First time they give it, yes.
Yeah, so we have, and I wrote this down, Melchior, Balthasar, and Casper, which I was looking up the Magi in the biblical sense, which is the three wise men that come to visit baby Jesus, which is Melchior, Balthasar, and Gasper, I believe. So I don't know if that was just a misspelling on their part.
Maybe.
But maybe they just heard it and they're like, yeah, Casper, like the ghost.
Yeah. But, I actually hope that's the case, that they, like, in their mind picturing the three wise men are just like, yeah, fuck it, Casper's there, yeah.
They're like Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Holy Ghost!
Casper. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so, it's the perfect trinity.
Yeah, I just figured this goes along with all the other, random three children, things like that. It's just a slight little mix up there. But
interesting parallel, yeah.
Yeah, getting more into the biblical sense of things, even more. We're not really sure how this is going to play in, but starts integrating through Melchior and then moving to Balthasar.
Melchior down in a flash.
Instantaneously, yeah. It's done. Yeah. And Rasuko comes up with an idea of, I believe she said, logic mode, we're going to do a code break every 15-second interval, which slows the angel down. So now they've got a couple hours, and their plan, which again, even looking at my notes, I was a little confused by, is they're going to accelerate the evolution, which I understood that part, but they're going to connect it to Casper, and they're going to reverse hack it to install a self-distraction encouragement program.
Self-destruction,
sorry. Spell check got me on my notes. Self-distraction,
It's like in the middle of hacking, it's just like, ooh, squirrel.
Oh, what? So it's an interesting idea. I'm a little confused of what their plan is, because the whole point the whole thing the angel is trying to do is to do a self-destruction on their facility. Yeah. Where they talk about, well, if the angel's life is on the line, maybe it will, I don't know what the wording is. Maybe it'll, become one with the Magi, essentially.
Yeah, coexist.
And decide, coexist. Thank you. So I don't really understand.
Which that's fascinating too, because that plan immediately makes you wonder, like, dude, if this like supercomputer merge like of the Angel merges with Magi and then like they can control it, think about like their technological advances they would immediately have access to.
Oh, yes.
So it's almost like high stakes, high rewards for them, where they're almost like, I'm not saying this is a good thing this is happening, but this could be a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm interested to see what your take is on this strategy and what I guess you think will or could come from that sort of thing happening.
It's a very bold strategy, and like so many things they do in other episodes, it's like the slightest chance for victory. Like their chances are just abysmal. Yet as much as they talk about Misato not being very lucky, granted she's just in the room. It's not like she's the one directing this. Although, no, it was Risuko's plan for the reverse hack, basically. Misato's just there, but as part of Nerv, if you're going off that collective luck, they seem to be very lucky.
They're very lucky. Always at the last minute too.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So that plan of, okay, well, the ultimate thing with rapid evolution ultimately leads to death. And so like, okay, yes, it's going to go for this plan of like self-destructing basically, which you would assume would kill it as well. So it is kind of weird to say like, but if we do it this way and like almost facilitate this rapid evolution, that in an act of self-preservation, it might just choose to coexist. I would think like if it's coexisting, I guess it's like a permanent melding, because it's not like it's given an alternative after this, essentially. Yeah. So it's a little bit odd to me, because it's like, well, if I knew one route leads to my self-destruction as well as everyone, which was my mission, everyone around me, to take them out as well, or this one is like, I don't technically die, but I lose any self agency or anything, and I basically become a tool of my enemy that I'm trying to destroy. You almost kind of wonder, like, is that the route that would be preferred better? And again, you would say like, well, does it have time to think about it? Well, it's a supercomputer. We've been watching it just going like cracking hundreds of 12 to 16 digit codes, just like running all these combinations and stuff. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. I get kind of the thing that, okay, it's acting, all these little sub nanobot computers, whatever, are acting as if they are a single, almost living being in a sense. And so they're trying to facilitate like the will to live basically. And just like, okay, fine. I will, coexist with the Magi and not die that way. It's almost like that's the question here. Because if it were anything less than a living being with a desire for self-preservation, you would assume like, oh, it's just going to go the self-destruct route because that's what it does. It doesn't care about its own fate. So I guess if they're going that way, saying that like its rate of growth almost made it like a living being, then that does ultimately make sense to me.
So we get into Risuko has got a plan where you're going to mess with Casper, and we are going to install this reverse hack. So we start getting into one of the Magi, and we pull it open, and there's little notes everywhere, like somebody didn't clean up their mess.
Yeah. I like the screw you Akari one on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she kind of sends a thank you to her mom, I guess, because she left all of these little backdoor hacks in this thing, which are going to allow them to get this task done in the amount of time they have to do it, which, of course, things don't always go according to plan. The Angel goes a little faster than they expected.
Yep.
But as I'm looking at their workspace, I was like, dear God, this room is such a mess. How did they get anything done? Which is kind of how I felt at the beginning of the episode. I was like, this is like a child's room that like no one cleans up, but everyone seems to be doing a great job.
Yeah. I look at it kind of like Risuko, like her mother, is probably like that mad genius who like to everyone else it's chaos, but to them they're like, it's messy, but I know where everything is. Like that sort of thing, like the order within chaos, which is what they showed us at the beginning, her directing traffic on like 14 different levels, even though everything is just chaotic around her. And they're even like, oh, like even like when Misato's like going to drink the coffee at the beginning, she's like, oh, that's been out a while or something like that. And she like, makes
that's cold face by now.
Yeah, it's like even just little things like that where she just has a perfect command and control of everything in her vicinity. I think this is the same sort of thing with all these notes and how messy the area is. You're like, how could someone operate in this? But it's like, if you're the right kind of person, you know how you think essentially, then there's a sense of order within the chaos that only you can see.
Yeah, so we get the final real explanation of the mom part, which Masato and Risuko are talking. She asks Masato, well, Masato first asked to explain the Magi to her because she doesn't really know.
Right.
To which Risuko says, that's a complicated, long-winded explanation, but let's just talk about this one piece. Are you familiar with a personality transplant type OS? She says this is a system where individuals' personality is transplanted into an organic computer so we can have cognitive thought. And this is when we figure out that her mom is the Magi. This whole time, her personality has been transplanted into these three different, wise men, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our computer system that we're operating off of, which was explained as the three parts of her, which were the scientist part, the mother part, and her part as a human, which I found incredibly interesting.
As a woman, they say specifically.
Oh, yes, as a woman. Thank you. Which Casper was the woman part of her, which is the part that held on until the last moment and still struck back and defeated the angel, which is so appropriate. But a really interesting take on the Magi now, which I liked. I liked it a lot. What was your thought?
I like it a lot. Again, it plays into, like we've been talking about, the three, that the significance of the number three, whether we're talking about the three children for now, the idea of the Magi being the three wise men and all of that. And I like the idea that each of the computers that comprise the Magi are separate personalities in that sense. So it's like, you can't look at just Casper and say like, well, that's my mother. It's like, no, that's a part of her. The three of them make up the entirety of who she was or whatever. And I also like that part where the one that holds out is the part of her that's almost like, you said it interchangeably earlier, like the human part of her, the part that's not a logical scientist or even like the maternal role, but almost like that part that's almost unreasonable within people in general, specifically women, like holding out to the bitter end and almost like defying reason and logic to an extent. Just the part that makes us feisty and unpredictable that. I thought that was very appropriate. And even though Ava does lay very heavily on like the fan service thing, it actually does have a number of strong female characters in it. That's one thing it actually does very well. There's not a lot of times in the series where you just see women like treated like garbage. And usually if it is, it's from like a truly despicable person or something.
Yeah.
They're viewed very much as equals and all of that. Like Misato and Ritsuko are next to Gendo and Futsuki are like the two highest authorities in Nerv that we see. And, they're in positions of great authority. So I think it's a good continuation of kind of that messaging that like the only thing that averted this in the end essentially was the will of two strong women, Ritsuko and her mother. So I thought that was good. Very unique. And like I mentioned earlier, the idea now that this angel has basically been absorbed into, melded with whatever the Magi, it's just like, you could get into a broader question and say like, okay, at that point, how much of the Magi really is still your mother? It's like if you're merging two consciousnesses, how much of the original is still there, or the new one, or is it a wholly new thing? That's an interesting question. But just the technological advances that theoretically they should have now is fascinating to consider. It's almost like one of those things where you're like, I don't think Gendo planned this, but if Gendo planned it, that sounds on brand. Like, it's risking everything. It might fail. but think about the advancements we'll make.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good episode, and I liked all of that as well. Where Ritsuko at the end, the notes I have on it, she admits she did not know her mother well, but she respected her as a scientist. But as a woman, she always hated her. And the reason Casper is the last one is because the woman inside her held out until the bitter end, and then she just kind of says like, "That's just like her." So it's just, again, we're establishing that like there was a distance between them, even though she followed in her shoes, not just in the same line of work, but literally for the same organization, doing the same work, as conflicted as her relationship with her mother is. She still followed in lockstep with her. There's even a thing you see in a different part in the series, and I really don't think this is any sort of spoiler. You just see at some point there is a photo of her and her mother. Her mother has purple hair, and Ritsuko also had purple hair. And it's implied that she dyed her hair because for how much she disliked her mother, she looked just like her, just like, 20 years younger or whatever. Mm-hmm. And as her attempt to try and differentiate herself somewhat and stand out, she just colored her hair and slightly changed the style a little bit. But there's just an interesting thing there where it just kind of, again, is going further into that and wanting to establish that independence while also acknowledging like, yeah, but in every other way, it's almost like I might as well be like a continuation of you,
Yeah, we definitely, with all of Shinji's questions on why is everyone doing what they're doing, mm-hmm. we definitely get that background question, even though it's not asked of her in this episode.
And I like that. It's something offered up voluntarily, it seems, where it's not having to be like dragged out of a person. Misato even says like, there's a lot of stuff you don't tell me. And I would say that we're really good friends generally. And she's just like, yeah, you're right. I don't really offer up a lot. But then throughout that episode, she kind of like, maybe it just finally is one of those things that hits close enough to home or puts it top of mind for her. And so she just finally offers it up, but it's just like, oh, we learned a lot from you this episode and kind of understand how you work a little bit now. That's interesting. I like
the situation called for the exposition.
And I love that because so many shows that want to like force feed you something like, I want you to understand this character. Now here's this completely far-fetched thing that we're going to put together where it just feels like, all right, we're going to force all this exposition and backstory at you. It might matter in the relevance of this one episode, but then we're going to move on and it's not going to matter much. Yeah. Everything in Eva feels like it builds upon and is a natural progression of that. And I always really appreciate that.
Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps up episode 13. Now we're moving on to episode 14, which is Seele, the Seat of the Soul. So what were your thoughts on this episode?
It's interesting because we've known for a little while that Gendo has to report to some organization that is Seele, Zele. There's different, depending on your dub, different pronunciations of it. Hell, the dub itself can't make up its mind at times. The only one I absolutely hate is when they're like Seele or like it's like make it a more of a Z almost, Zele or Seele. I can deal with those. But when you're like Seele or whatever, then it's just like we're getting too goofy with this. So yeah, it's interesting because the first part of this episode, it's not like I was bored, but I was kind of like, is this like a soft recap episode?
Oh, you weren't bored rewatching the whole first 12 to 13 episodes?
Yeah. I was like, and every now and then they're showing you like snippets of these events and then giving you almost like excerpts from the Seele reports talking about like basically what their observation was from this, like what the very first instance was of the first Angel attack and what that suggested about like Unit 1 and the pilot Nerv in general. Then here's this after the second and the third, and you're just like, you're watching through this and you're like, okay, like it's kind of interesting to like hear their thoughts, but this is a slow burn beginning to this episode. And it's one of those ones where every time I'm rewatching this episode, it's one that I struggle with more in terms of paying attention for the first half. And then the second half almost feels like, okay, we're moving forward again and it's interesting again. Because before it's almost like you had to wait for like the moments of silence because their excerpts would literally be just text on a screen, like a black screen with white text. And you'd have to read like what their report findings were in a lot of cases. And you're just like, okay, yep, here's the scene I've already seen. Oh, silence. Let me read. Okay. And it's like just trying to maintain that focus. But then the second half of it is new stuff. And you're seeing kind of those interactions. And it's like, okay, that's better. I just wish there was more of that and that we had maybe condensed the first part of it a little bit more. I didn't need to see angel by angel by angel what their thoughts were. Just give me like a few highlights here and there, the significant realizations.
So what's our total episode count at the end of the series? 26?
26 is the final episode.
So we're literally halfway through right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing that's why we did get this essentially a recap.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like, hey, we're really far in. Maybe people have forgotten at this point. Now we're watching week to week, which I guess is probably how it was coming out originally. Yeah. But, you know, you get a little lost in the series. Maybe you miss one or two. You got to figure out what happened. The key highlights are there. But
yeah,
we start with the third angel, which I don't remember if that missile strip was in the episode that we watched or if that was just in this recap.
Where it put out a hand and the thing like splits along its finger?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that was
such a good scene. I was like, man, did I miss that the first time? Because that is an awesome animation. I really loved it.
Yeah.
But yeah, my notes on this at first were previously on Evangelion.
Yeah.
Because that's how the whole first of this episode feels, which it is kind of a briefing. It's kind of like an interview type format, but it's like, wow, we were really just going through the, okay, here's what happened in the past. So
and that's why my notes for this episode were shorter, because I literally just put like, all right, we're going to be talking about the other stuff that's happened for a minute, and then I'll pick back up when it gets going again. Like that's my note. Like I'll pick up when something new is happening.
Yeah. So when I first started, like really, I guess trying to like take some notes on like what's happening. Well, I did make a mention of Risuko is very reminiscent of like Sarah Connor's monologue in I think Terminator 2. Yeah. And I kind of got those vibes from that. And I was like, I'm digging this like voiceover thing we've got going on right now.
So you said Risuko, are you talking about like Rey and her synchronization test when she's like musing philosophically?
I believe no. This is before Rey is going through. Yeah, Risuko is like doing like a monologue while we're kind of like watching some of these scenes, and I'd have to.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So we see the first angel, which I don't think we got some of these scenes, or maybe I'm just paying attention to it more now that I'm noticing all the religious stuff of the show. But when Shinji's Eva kills the first,
it's the first one we see, but it's technically the third angel.
Yes, but the first battle that the Evas have ever been used in. Yes. The first time that Nerv actually seized control was Shinji's first mission.
Yes.
Which when he kills that, we see a blast, which forms a cross, which that's not how blasts work, but there's
happens when it's an angel blowing up.
Is there a cross every time?
Every time.
Really? I've never noticed it to this point. I don't know how I've missed that.
It's a stylistic thing. It's not exclusive to angels, but like for the most part, it is. Yeah. Depending on if you ask, if you were to ask the series creator and everything about it, he would at times tell you it's more of just like a stylistic choice, like the biblical imagery and metaphors and everything. But then there's other times when it's like, no, you're drawing a parallel, an illusion. There's a commentary here. It just depends. There are definitely times as we move on though, where it's like you can get so lost trying to analyze the imagery and iconography that they're calling to that it's just like you almost have to view that as the prism you're viewing through, but you don't have to go down the rabbit hole to its end to try and find the meaning they're saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, the cross thing, yes, that happens when angels explode.
Yeah, that's literally the first time I've noticed it. I feel embarrassed I didn't catch it earlier. I was rewatching the as we're going through these scenes, I'm rewatching the one where the angel comes down and they kind of hold it by its AT field. And I don't remember the cross in that explosion. Now, I am going to go back and watch it to make sure that...
That's a good point. I don't know that one does explode. I think they just pierce the core and it just kind of falls flat onto them.
Oh, the bomb, there's massive bomb that comes out of it. But it could be so high that it's like in the atmosphere that the cross is happening. So I'm not entirely sure, but I'm interested. So we also talk about the UN Navy ships as we're going back through some of these battles that they lost like
a third.
This is a third, which is pretty significant. And again, I'm just like, okay, we're still in the debriefing phase right now, and we're talking to the Human Instrumentality Council.
Human Instrumentality Council, yep.
Yeah, what a name. And he
Human
lies.
Instrumentality will come up a few times.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so it's one of those ones you'll learn.
So he lies directly to everyone's face as they're pretty much presenting the evidence in front of him. He's like, yeah, that's bullshit. So we're good. Pretty sure I'm the one making the rules around here, and just nothing happened. So we're all good. But he didn't really have an explanation.
Yeah, I love when they're like, they're calling him out on it, like, oh, so you're telling us that that's not what happened. And he's like, you can check the reports yourself. And they're like, we all know that you know how to write those reports however you want. As I don't know if they're implying like that he's hacking it or falsifying something, but his response might as well just be like, and this is just the tone, but it might as well just be like, bitch, maybe, but what are you going to do about it? It's just like, could not care less that he's just like, it doesn't matter if I don't care if you're making that accusation. The point is, the only thing that you have for evidence against me doesn't say that I did what you said I did.
Yeah. And I think they were talking about asking the Magi or getting that information from the Magi, which makes me really interested in like if he has this level of I can go back through and kind of like alter the facts. How much control does he have on the Magi?
And why would he have that control?
Oh,
yes.
Getting into future stuff here.
Yep. Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of conversation and all of that, because in this scene you're kind of learning like, okay, these guys, the Human Instrumentality Council, which are of SEELE, represent like they have a very clear goal that is very much not public facing.
Yep.
Gendo has a plan of his own, however, which both parties seem to be fully aware of, but it's almost kind of like Gendo is the only one that can see it through. And so it's kind of like they need each other, and they're going in, working together, knowing at some point, one of us is going to have to like basically betray the other, because our plans, our visions do not go together exactly
we don't align
the same way. But we have to like run this out until we reach that critical moment, which is just like, it's an interesting thing, kind of like the, what's it? Is that like a Alfred Hitchcock thing, talking about like this idea, like you don't show the audience there's a bomb under the table, but you tell them there's a lit bomb or whatever under the table. And then you let the scene play out, and just that tension building with time. That's kind of what this is signaling. Cause you're like, so we're going to reach a critical point where all of this is going to come to a head, and they're going to try to outdo one another and take this wherever they're going. By the way, no one else outside of that room has any idea where either plan is going to go.
Yeah.
And we don't know when that's going to happen, but like it's a fascinating way to build tension, I think, going into the second half of the series.
Yeah. Interesting. So we talk to the council, then we get into the scene you were mentioning earlier, which is Ray's poetry session, which I was like, we take a short break from Evangelion to go over poetry.
Yeah, I love this scene. Even watching it again, like, it's interesting, not in that, like, she's kind of like waxing philosophical. Mm-hmm. And like some of the connections are just so random of pivots, and like not how things go, but how like you can see the bouncing ball and understand like how she's jumping from one thought to the next. But what I love about it, again, we don't get to see inside Ray's head very often. And so like you have this very broad sweeping thing talking about humanity and existence and like what it means to be alive and all of this stuff. And you're just like, oh shit, she's really getting deep with this. And then like it's like coming back and it's like during this like synchronization test or whatever. And then it comes back and I think it's Ritsuko asks her like, "Oh, so how did that feel? How did that feel, Ray? Like, how did that connection feel?" And she was just like, "Yeah, it's fine." She just like goes right back to like, it's like just again, for a character who says so little to know that like this is the stuff going on in her mind and what she thinks about is just like really interesting to me. Like it's one of those things where you take a character who could normally seem so boring in any given scene. Now, after this, you're kind of like, what are you actually thinking right now? Like, what are you actually considering? Because it's definitely not the one word answer you just gave.
Yeah. So what I got out of this scene, so this is when we figure out at the end of this poetry session that they are doing, what is the word for it?
Synchronization?
It's something different. It's interchangeability trials.
Yes, because she's in Unit 1.
Yes, because she's in
first time she's
Shinji's unit. And then now that I'm thinking back to her poetry, I decide to go back, and I don't think any of those are her memories. I believe those are Shinji's memories that she's getting from his Ava, which is why we get to see some of those like key memories that we have with him, like especially him seeing the unmasked Ava, which is not a memory that we know that Rey has had before.
Correct.
She's also like analyzing characters from more of an outsider perspective than it's her memory. She's like, oh, this is Misato. This is my classmates. This is the pilot of Ava 2, which is exactly how she would refer to that.
Yeah.
Shinji would be like,
she never once says Asuka's name, I don't think.
Yeah, because she doesn't
matter.
She's nothing to her.
Yeah.
But to Shinji, that is someone, which is why that's like a core memory is her.
I can't wait for like whenever we get later in the series before we do the end of Evangelion movie, when we do like almost like not our recap, but like the revisit, the overview, like things that we now realize later. You know what I mean? This will be one of those ones that's interesting to come back to at some point. But yes, you're right. She's seeing Shinji's memories and analyzing them, kind of understanding them in that way. And yeah, it's because she's in his usual Ava Unit 1, and it's the results for her synchronization rate and all that are almost identical, they say, to her Unit 0, which is, for the sake of the test, a huge success. Yeah. And they also have Shinji get into Unit 0, which is kind of interesting too. It's somewhat tense at it, you know, like he's same thing. He's seeing a lot of Rey's memories, but it's not as deep as what I feel like Rey saw of his, which if it had been, it would have been interesting, like more interesting probably. But, you know, he kind of recognizes it immediately as like that familiarity and everything. Asuka, meanwhile, is wondering like if she's going to have to do the same thing. And Misato kind of plays it off of like, oh, you don't want to pilot anything other than Unit 2, right? And she's like, well, I guess that's true. But then internally, Misato's like, yeah, that wouldn't have been an option anyway, because it's not the same. Like, it's not interchangeable like Unit 0 and 1, which are kind of built from the same foundation. Unit 2 is like a separate thing. But again,
yeah, which I found interesting, and I needed a little bit more explanation on, because if we go back to the Water Ships Navy episode, I'm not sure which one that was. Episode 2, 3, 8?
The Watership Navy? That was 8,
Dear
I think.
God.
That's Asuka's introduction.
Man, that was really far, and it doesn't feel like that was that far.
It feels like she's been here longer than 5
yes,
episodes.
Yes, it really
or so,
does.
Yeah.
So in that episode, we get Shinji and her are in the same Ava. They're in Unit 2, and they sync together. They fight this force. So if he's able to work with her then, why is it not interchangeable? That's what I'm a little confused about.
I think if he was in it by himself, it probably wouldn't have worked.
So it required her presence.
I think so.
It's like coded to her in a certain way.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, I already know that you know more than me, and I don't like it.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with some of the questions you're asking me, because I can't give much. But yes, you ask interesting questions.
Okay. So they both mention the smell, which I found like, okay, why are we mentioning smell specifically? And when I'm thinking about it, it's like, okay, well, we had this sort of memory transfer, which Shinji took a lot less gracefully than Rei did. But I'm wondering if the smell is like them essentially not really in the other one's body, but like since they're taking these memories, it's like I feel like they're also like sense of smell, sense of taste, and maybe they're smelling the other person because like they were them temporarily. And since that smell is not natural to them, it's more apparent like, wow, I'm really like, that is her smell. Like she's smelling herself from her own nose, which is a lot different than like how you would just smell someone in passing, maybe.
Right.
But interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And while her test in Unit 1, Rei's, went great, Shinji's goes a little bit haywire. After he starts seeing remnants of Rei's consciousness, Unit 0 trips balls. Starts rampaging, smashing through the window. Like it looks like it's trying. This is kind of confusing here. It looks like it's trying to punch through the window to punch Rei and like kill her. And you're like, oh, why is Unit 2 attacking her? Is it like pissed that she was just in Unit 1 for some reason? And Rei is just being Rei. She's like not even flinching. She's not even moving.
She's dead staring it, doesn't move a muscle, and you can tell it's like about to break through the window.
And Gendo did that same shit earlier too in a prior episode, if you recall. Almost exactly like the thing like punches the glass in front of him and he doesn't flinch at all. But Misato is basically saying like, oh, Unit 0 was trying to kill Rei, but then moments later, after all this is averted and they've powered down Unit 0, Risuko says that Unit 0 was trying to kill her, as in Risuko, and that she has no doubt in her mind. And it's like, what does that mean?
Why?
I'm still not even sure of that. I'm still not even sure about it. But again, she says it with such certainty that I'm just like, I'm going to have to pay attention, I guess. Did I miss something? Am I forgetting something? Possible.
So this is not something that you remember.
I don't know the answer on this.
Later.
Yeah, I don't. It might be, but I missed it somehow. Like I said, every time I go through the series, I usually find more. I will say that there are a couple threads that you run to the end of. They're not major ones, thankfully. There are a couple threads you follow to the end, and you're like, "Did we answer that? No." And I even tried looking it up online to find answers, and it's just like, there's not a satisfying answer to that, is there? That stinks. But the major stuff's all covered. There's just a couple like side things that, if you like, well, wait, what was that? And then you look at it, and you're like, oh, I don't know that they knew. So. I don't know. Maybe this is one of those threads, and maybe that's why I've not picked up on it in 4 viewings of the series now. But yeah.
So I think honestly, with my notes, we're coming close to an end. There's one more key aspect that we need to discuss now.
Okay, go into it.
Which is the spear of
Longinus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is also known as the spear of, you might have seen like Constantine or something like that. It's the spear of destiny, which is the spear that is said to have pierced Jesus's side when he was hanging on the cross.
Interesting. Yeah, so we're getting into interesting stuff here. So do you remember earlier as well when the council made reference to the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yes.
That is important because everything of every plan from Seele and Gendo has to do with what is foretold in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They are trying to follow a supposed script of fate and destiny to this pivotal point where they can shape the direction of the future, essentially. And that has a lot to do with that. We have Futsuki kind of bemoaning the council's interference and everything, and they're making clear, like, yeah, we don't see eye to eye. Our plan is still good, but we have to work within their structure for now. But yes, the Spear of Longinus is a very interesting thing as well, because you're just like, okay, how is that going to play into the information you had there on the piercing Jesus side? That's interesting. I actually did not draw that immediate part of the connection to it. I just knew it was a biblical reference of significance, but I didn't gather that. So that's interesting. That particular artifact is definitely going to come into play.
Yeah, and my understanding, at least from previous interpretations of the spear, other film stuff like that, is that this spear has some sort of power, essentially. Like it was a weapon, but now that it's been, it has pierced Jesus' side and has his blood, that it contains more power than any weapon on planet Earth, essentially. Whether, I don't know how that will come to fruition in this show, but in other, source material from different things, this can, alter the course of humanity. It can kill things that nothing else could destroy because it has this like holy power to it now.
Ava, the way that Ava seems to present things, it's not saying that like in this literal sense that the spear of Longinus is the one that pierced Jesus' side. The way I would interpret how Ava presents its biblical references and stuff is almost like those depictions of those stories that shaped its mythos, the Christian mythos and everything, came from the actual everything happening here with these angels, with the actual spear of Longinus that eventually comes into play, that those things, like the knowledge of those are like fictionalized, almost like a fanfic, like into what becomes the mythos of the Christian religion, if that makes sense. Because there's no mention of Jesus anywhere or anything like that. But there are a lot of biblical allegories. Obviously we have an Adam, and everything. And
I mean, we've got the cross too.
Well, yes. Yeah. We have those things. And obviously Misato wears a cross. So there's something in there. Christianity exists in the world. It's just not one of those things where it's like, this is definitively what happened. It's almost like more, these are the stories that were drawn from the little bits and pieces they knew of this, is how I take it. So, yeah.
Kind of like the thought of, there's people that think of the Bible essentially, like let's take Noah's Ark as less of an actual event and more
of an allegory.
Something that's trying to, a warning, a story to tell children to make them change their ways or to realize that, certain things need to change.
Yeah. Definitely. And the last thing in the episode, again, in that conversation with Gendo and Futsuki, they're basically just trying to see like, okay, well, are we still on track for our plan? And Gendo says that everything is on track. If you're watching with captions turned on, the captions actually are a little bit different. He says like within 2%. I don't even know what the hell that means. That's probably why the actual voiceover just simplified it to say like, yes, everything's on course. Because like if you're saying 2%, you might as well be saying it's on track.
Yeah. Funny you said that because I actually turned the subtitles on just before that scene happened. And I was like, wow, that's a very different dub than a sub. But
yeah, that happens sometimes. And one of the things that can be confusing with Ava, like I talked about, like the localizations and the different dubs that sometimes will tweak a line to try and localize it a little differently. Sometimes even the subtitles, it's not just that they'll differ. Sometimes the meaning of what they're saying could differ significantly, or the reliability of the translation that is the subtitle isn't necessarily the most reliable. Ava, it all lends to Ava being just this huge interpretive work, but I don't think it ever like completely derails it where you're like, oh, well, how am I supposed to follow anything? But like there are times where, again, if you want to go down certain rabbit holes to feel like you're nailing everything down 100%, you're just so at the mercy of different localizations, different dubs, different the subtitles and stuff, depending on those localizations. I've seen a couple examples where you take something, the subtitles in the Japanese version and how that translates compared to the English version and those subtitles and how that translates. And you're just like, oh, I feel like this character's motive in this scene is kind of strikingly different. Like, at least the place from which they're coming if that makes sense. Like it's one of those ones I can't give you the example because it's way too late in the game. But if I was trying to pinpoint a character's emotion at a pivotal part and I was trying to understand what exact position they were coming from, I would guess in one version it's more this. In this version, I would guess it's like over here. Both are coming from a negative place, but the attitude as it directs towards the other character significantly changes in terms of greater implication, you know?
It's almost like all the different interpretations of the Bible.
Oh, snap. We needed a loud crack of thunder behind you for that storm just then. Flash of lightning, your power goes out, and we're done.
And we're done for today.
And God has canceled us. Oh, man. But anyway, they say, yes, everything's going according to plan, and that Project Adam is being carried out by Ray. The last shot then is Ava Unit 0 marching through some huge dark corridor, and we see into the cockpit, Ray just having this complete, like Ray does, complete blank or stoic expression as she's marching somewhere. And I can't tell. It looks like maybe she's carrying something.
She's carrying the spear.
She has the spear in her. Yeah, that's right. She has the spear already. So yes, the spear of Longinus, they already have it apparently. And so now you're like, and you wonder why the angels are interested. You have Adam and you have the spear of Longinus. These feel significant given everything we do know. So yeah, very, very interesting here. What are sort of your takeaways? I'm curious, like at this point now, like we said, we're technically now just over halfway, but basically the halfway point of the series. What are you drawing from like the bigger picture of this as it relates to humanity, the angels, and whatever thing they're moving toward with Adam and the spear and all that?
Such a great question. And I feel so out of the loop right now because all I want to know is what's going to happen. And I really have no idea at this point. I mean,
that's
just
a good thing, honestly. Like it shows like it's not predictable.
Yeah. So, I mean, my initial interpretation at this point is that Gendo wants to recreate humanity in its original image because we have become distorted and whatever we are now, and we're so far away from the way that things were intended to be that he essentially wants to do a reset, which my guess is that is probably where him and the council would differ. Because most people probably do not want to end humanity, but I would definitely see Gendo being someone that's like, burn it all down. Maybe I go with it. Maybe I just create anew. He very godlike complex from his personality.
He did say at the South Pole, the site of the second impact, that it was, he doesn't use the word beautiful, but he's basically making it sound like he's marveling at it, like it's some beautiful thing because it's a land now free of original sin.
Yes.
So I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
And maybe the council is more, and again, this is all just a guess. And maybe the council is more from the side of, okay, we have all these angel attacks. We are eventually doomed because we can't fight this battle forever. Every time we fight, we have a little less money. We have a little less resources. One day the angels will win. But with this spear of destiny, I don't know if they're even aware of Adam. I don't know if they're aware of the spear of destiny at this point. But I think that the spear may be in their plan, as well as the scrolls of how can we use these materials to fight against the angels or to stop the impending attacks that come, essentially undo the end of man.
Yeah. The word has been used at this point in the series. So somewhere in here, there has been mention of sort of an end game, and it's just trying to interpret what that entails, essentially. It's not spelled out, but I did catch when it dropped in there for the first time, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that was this early that was said. But yeah, it's very interesting watching these kind of sides in the shadows moving like a chess match against one another while also still working towards it's like, we're going to go 90% the same direction, but then we're going to diverge fairly significantly. And it's almost like who can get that last 10% before the other, because only one side can get what they want in this. I think at this point, and it's just one of those questions that I've mulled over enough that I think based on what we've seen so far, I can get into without it tiptoeing into saying too much territory. I'm fascinated by the Angels because I'm really curious why they're drawn to Adam, if they know about the spear there, if that's what they're drawn to. But we saw for sure on the naval cruiser thing, like it was Adam they were after. And so the impression I get is almost like it's a race to this significant event. Now we know in the past there's been a first impact, a second impact, which was somehow, or no, the second one, I'm trying to remember if the second one was stopped. I think it was. The second one was like somehow avoided at the, like it happened. Half of humanity was wiped out, but it wasn't the total extinction event that it would have been, I think. And so it almost seems like it's a race to this whatever analogous or not analogous, vague idea of this point in destiny almost. And I get the impression that Seele is racing towards it. Gendo, acting at the head of Nerv, is racing towards it. And I kind of feel like the Angels have their own agenda beyond just like, get to Adam. Like, why is it get to Adam? Mm-hmm. So I think you really have three sides all racing towards, like I said, that 90%. And then the last 10%, what they do at this moment, whenever it comes, whatever it is what the real fascinating question is. That's my interpretation. So just another thing that adds a layer to it. Like I said, I don't think the Angels are completely unique all on their own. I think they are battle by battle, encounter by encounter, observing, just like Nerv does, observing what worked, what didn't. And then they come back the next time with a new strategy to do that. Like, even though they generally, except for the one that's split in two, generally fight one at a time, I think it is still a team effort, if you will, where there's an ultimate goal and they're just trying different chess moves to do that and to try and get to whatever they want in Nerv HQ, Adam, or whatever.
I'm wondering, after we're discussing this, we see the Angels, and my assumption is that God is sending these Angels for this fight. But what if Gendo's the devil?
Man, there are so many interesting questions, but I can't get into one that I want to because the name has not come up yet. It's on the thread that we mentioned before, and it was last episode, I think. We mentioned the biblical analogies and parallels and, symbolism and things like that. And you were mentioning the name Adam, of course, which we know. And you mentioned Eve. And I was like, yeah, Eve. Yeah. If we're going off of like the story and everything, though, there are fascinating implications that come up when you see like one, the parallel to Adam, or the opposite to Adam, or counterpart, whatever you want to say, would be. And then as it relates in the biblical sense, what that character, if you will's, actual fate sort of is, and then what that would say about the like, I can't get into it. I'm already saying, like, I'm tiptoeing all around it, and I'm like, I can't say that. Let me try and say it this way. No, I can't say that. This way. No. Fuck, I got nothing. It's the only thing I can say. Not Adam and Eve.
Adam and Steve.
That's why I was going on that, but no, not Steve. So yeah, you can't think in terms of Adam and Eve, even though there is an Adam, but it is an Adam and something or someone. And as you follow that down the line, and again, it's not giving away plot things. It's just if you're going off a more strictly biblical parallel symbolism, all of that, it to me is such a fascinating implication of what you get to. But it predates Eve in some ways. I'm so excited for you to eventually figure this out so I can talk about it.
Not today.
I know, not today. But yeah, we're getting to the point where this series is getting really good because now we're really starting to delve into all this lore. And like I said, some of it can be not misdirection, but just you can get wrapped up in it and you don't have to follow it down. In fact, it just distracts if you go too far down in some of these threads. Even the one that I'm excited to talk about there, it's more like my interpretation, but it's not like if you didn't pick up on that suddenly nothing makes sense or it's not enjoyable in the series. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's one of those interesting things where you're like, ooh, well, if it did go off of that, then what this would mean is really cool about like what it feels like at a broader level you would be like saying in terms of your commentary. But yeah, interesting stuff.
I'm excited.
Yep. So what are the next 2 episodes? Just previewing here. Episode 15 is Lies and Silence. So we're going to be going back to the second impact, I believe. And then episode 16, this is a long title, The Sickness Unto Death and the Splitting of the Beast. Oh yeah, some of these episode titles, like some of them are just nice and short, crisp. And then others are like 15 to 20 words and you're just like, like I got to click the full link to actually read the thing. That's crazy. Yes, so these next 2, we're going back to the second impact here. And we're going to get a bigger picture yet again of what went down. That's what I like. Where you get the first story, you're like, okay, yeah. And you get a little bit more, and you're like, oh, okay, so not that, but that. Oh, okay, cool. And then you come back to it like a third time, and it's just like, oh, shit. You really didn't tell me anything the first time. Like, just the layered storytelling. It's almost like as you get closer to it, you kind of pulled in a little bit more into that inner circle of confidants, if you will. And then you kind of learn a bit more about it. So very, very cool stuff here. Again, we're in the whole level here where now we're going to start really delving into SEELE and specifically the depth of which that they're directing things and everything.
I'm excited to see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to wait till next week.
I know. I'm so mad. I'm so mad right now. But it is what it is.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. We still need a tagline. We'll get a tagline.
Thanks, everybody. Fuck you.
Thank you. Fuck you. Bye. That's our tagline.
Go fuck yourself.
Oh, God. All right.